Hi, my name is Marcus, and this is a companion podcast for the CG Jung-helpdesk meetup group. I host live events on Zoom every 2 weeks about the concepts and ideas of the Swiss psychologist Carl Gustav Jung. Every event, I give a presentation about the Jungian concept, so have fun with this event's topic. All right, so thank you everybody for coming for this special topic on nature and Jung's idea about it, which is obscure, quite obscure. So I'm very happy that a lot of people thought it's interesting and are using their free time to participate in exploring this topic. And Jung was a psychologist, and of course, he had an idea about the psyche and how it is structured. And let's say the top part seems to be very obvious for us. We always have our consciousness. This is us perceiving something and acting in the world and doing things, wanting things, growing, learning, and so on. And in the lower part are the things we do not know yet, we cannot do yet, that we do not understand yet. And this is the unconscious part. And the unconscious things can become conscious through effort of consciousness. And Jung did not stop really there because, let's say, with Freudian psychology, it's always very personal. May it be the consciousness, which is you as a person, or the unconscious parts, where Freud says, these unconscious parts, they are repressed wishes or memories or traumata that are not processed yet and cause trouble. This is why they have to be brought to light. And one big disagreement between Jung and Freud in the question of human psychology was really that Jung saw a deeper level below the personal. And this is the collective, and this is the collective unconscious. This is what we share with all the human beings that are now in the world and that were in the world and that will ever be in the world, and what it means to be a human being. So a lot of, let's say, dreams or art and culture, it comes from there, from a very deep place that connects a lot of people through their psyche. But Jung saw it even lower. He said, okay, if you go deeper and deeper, you hit certain instincts that are not only common to humans, they are common to all animals. We can, for example, sympathize with dogs. And we can go further. We can sympathize with dogs better than with reptiles, but we can sympathize with reptiles better than with insects or with, for example, plants. There's a commonality, and you go lower and lower and lower, and you go more and more into nature. And he says the soul and the psyche, when you go deep enough, it becomes world, it becomes matter, it becomes atoms. So if you go deep enough in the psyche, at a certain point, you hit carbon, and all life forms on Earth are carbon based. So then it's atoms. He saw not really a big distinction between our unconscious psyche or the bodily and really this earthly nature part. For him, it was very fluent. It was more happening on a spectrum, but everything being connected. So the bottom of the psyche is world, and it is nature. And he had some ideas about what nature is and what nature does. And one thing that is typical Jung and like a marquee thing about his ideas is nature is autonomous. So it does things independently of human interaction and human wishes. Like it rains and the seasons change whether we want it or not. And another thing is that nature does not have consciousness as we have. We can store things, we have memory, we can experience the things that are happening. And Jung says nature itself, it just is, and it does things, and things are happening. Like, for example, a flame that is burning. It is not itself conscious, it's just acting out things. It's following a natural flow of things. This will be a very important distinction between this conscious and unconscious in regards to human beings and nature. So, what does it say about us human beings when we say we are closer to nature than we think? And if we go deep enough in the psyche, it is nature. Jung saw this collective unconscious part as a kind of stored memory of human history. We would call it maybe human nature or evolutionary psychology today. He said there were certain occurrences that just happened so often to human beings that they became ingrained in a kind of human nature. So it's always true. It means what it means to be a human being. For example, he said the setting up, the rising of the sun and the going down of the sun. This is something that just is so often that it becomes ingrained in the psyche and is there a priori. So we do not start with a blank slate, but rather we have a kind of condensed wisdom or, let's say, experience that got soaked up by all the human beings that came before. This is also then where culture, art, and so on comes from. Right? It's not a coincidence that a lot of stories that we have today and seem new follow certain structures or images or situations that are you can find in stories and mythologies or religious texts that are thousands and thousands of years old and are from the other side of the world. This was his indication that there is something independent, this independent storehouse of images and motives and drama, that you could find it in many different cultures, in many different epochs, and you have the same things coming up again and again. So he did a lot of comparative analysis of stories, fairy tales, spiritual, occult things, and also religious things. And this is a collective unconscious. So he thinks human beings being in the world interjects something from nature into them. And this is an old Hermetic idea that's also from the alchemist. We have this as above, so below, that the human beings in their psyche and their body are mirroring the world, that there is certain similarities there because we are not separated from that. We have been living for millions of years in that. And a very nice explanation is coming from Richard Dawkins, who has this example from if we had aliens coming to Earth and they would get a duck and they would start to just dissect the duck and look at it biologically wise, they could find out so much about Earth and how it's set up. What is the gravity? What kind of laws do we have here in the physical sense? The atmosphere, how it's composed, what is eating, because the body and also the psyche is an adaptation to nature. It's about solving a problem, and the problem is surviving, and our psyche and our body an adaptation for that. So Jung never really explicitly talks about evolution, but his ideas and thought processes mirror that really a lot. So, and to bring it then back to Jung, this goes so far that when you do dream analysis and you have dreams, and you dream, for example, of animals. So I had a really weird dream about a fox with weird eyes this night. He said the best starting point to understand a dream when you dream of an animal is to look up how the animal is acting in its natural environment, how it is behaving. Because this tells you something about your unconscious trying to tell you something. And the best analogy it has in its storehouse is, for example, fox in my case. And you can find out many, many interesting things about that. And this comes back to the idea of unconscious and conscious. You might not know, for example, with a fox, how the normal social behavior of this fox is or makes foxes special. But your, let's say, human nature, the experience that it's ingrained there, is telling you and knowing it about how foxes behave and why this picture then was shown. This is then reflected upon and consciously unpacked. And this can be then integrated into consciousness. So yeah, the biology is still happening inside, and there's a mirroring of the real world happening in the unconscious and in the psyche. And I had this example recently when I did the event on Puer Eternus, what it means when people dream of children, that Jung said, okay, you have to take the age of the children you're dreaming about. If it's, for example, 2 years old or 3 years old, you should go back and see what happened 2 or 3 years ago because something was born. So these natural processes are matched in the psyche and in the unconscious and playing out as they would do in nature. And what does it mean for human beings? Because human beings are special. We have consciousness, which is in a sense opposed to nature. And for this event, I really found a lot of quotes that are pretty amazing. Jung has a weird way to write and is sometimes pretty dry for long stretches, but sometimes he has this ability to condense it down into very few sentences. So I will have a lot of quotes today. And here's the first one. Nature never preserves. If you leave a thing to the unconscious, its value will disappear. They cannot be held by the unconscious. That is why consciousness was produced. It is as if nature herself realized that it had apparently become necessary for somebody to realize what was going on. Damn it. That's a quote. Jung does not swear a lot, but he did in this quote. This goes back to the idea how Jung saw consciousness. He sees consciousness really as a kind of net that can catch things. And your experience determines what you can see. And I always bring this example of a friend of mine who studied geology. And we were walking through the forest. And he could say, oh, yeah, there was an iceberg coming here 10,000 years ago. And I thought, how do you know that? He said, yeah, okay, if you look into the ground, it has this color and this texture, but below it's like this. and you have these boulders over there. And he studied geology, so he learned this. I did not. So for me, it was just forest and ground. I could not see what happened there, but he could see it because he had the knowledge, he gained the skills, he had the consciousness to process this information. The information we got was the same, but the question is really, is it stored? Can we keep it? And this is consciousness. Consciousness is a net. And as we grow and develop, we can catch more and more things, and we can understand more and more things. And this is important because this is how we grow, by expanding our consciousness, our understanding. And there's another quote about that. You may find a marvelous diamond, for instance. Yes, provided you value it and have it polished, it will be of great value and beauty. But if you think it is a stone like any other stone, nature will never prevent you from throwing away a diamond, nor will nature ever produce a particular golden setting around it. If you throw it into the river, it will be carried away and ground to dust in the course of time. This is a very typical thing for Jung. He says there's a undercurrent always happening. There's life happening. There's nature happening. The question is really if we participate and engage with it, because all these opportunities, for example, the diamond that he's speaking about, they come, and if you don't seize them, they're gone. They do not wait for us. Like nature, this is this unconscious, autonomous part, is taking its course and doing things. And it is for us to realize it, even that what we have there is valuable. So, for example, what we have with a free market capitalist system is a lot of finding value in things that might not look valuable. Example, you have Henry Ford, who invented the modern automobile that could be mass produced, and it had wooden flooring. And for that, he would grow special forests just to have the right kind of wood for his flooring of his automobiles that he was selling mass produced. But of course, when you have a tree, you cannot use everything of the tree, like the small branches, or when it's not a good tree, to make these wooden pieces that would go into the floor. And he looked at it and said that that's a huge waste. I'm throwing away a lot of stuff. What can I do with it? Is there potential value? So Henry Ford basically invented modern grilling and barbecuing by making charcoal out of it and selling it. So he saw something that other people did not necessarily see and came up with something and generated value in that. So this is one of the advantages of a free market economy, that it's free enough that people can engage and find value somewhere. And it's in this case also, the question is a lot of valuable things happening around us. For example, a dream that might tell us something about ourselves, about our future, but we might miss it. We might not understand it. We might forget the dream or not take it seriously. It just could pass us. And what Jung said is pay attention to these things happening because they could have value. And the whole idea about alchemy, for example, Jung talked the last third of his life only about alchemy, is this idea of the philosopher's stone, of the lapis, is first the thing that is thrown away because it's not understood as valuable. It takes a whole alchemical process to understand that it is actually valuable. It's going from lead to gold. The gold was always there, but it was not recognized. This is the idea that Jung is trying to get at with this idea of the diamond that you might throw away because you might not recognize it as important. And nature is not telling you that it's important. It's like your job to find out that it's important. And the next quote goes into that. Nature simply produces something. She never tells us her laws. It is human intelligence that discovers them and makes extractions and classifications. So there's stuff happening, but it's not self-explanatory. When you find a fish, the fish won't tell you what species it is. That would be absurd. But it's for human beings to find, okay, this fish has a certain behavior that the fish is not aware of, right? It belongs to a certain family of other fish that it is not aware of. And human beings uncover that by writing, by thinking, by investigating, and then formalizing about it and reflecting. So this is what he really sees in consciousness, this gathering, this reflecting, this structuring and organizing, to bringing things together. And if you look, for example, in the scientific human endeavor, it's really this complete mapping of the world, this understanding, this drive to understand. And understanding means give it a name, set it into relation to other things, give it concepts, structures, methods. And this is what consciousness does. And is what human beings can do. But as hinted at already in the earlier quotes, consciousness is something unusual. It is a deviation. And a good example for this deviation you would have in the Bible in the story of Lucifer. You have many angels and you have Lucifer, the light bringer, is also in the name. And he tried to get out of this, let's say, orchestra of God. He wanted to be in the front of it. He wanted to be separated from it. God saw it, that there was too much independence, so he punished it, banished him from heaven, and put it into hell. And this is very often the story that you have in mythology, for example, with Prometheus, that somebody tried to separate themselves from, let's say, God's plan and being punished severely for it through God and circumstances, or gods in that case. And having consciousness means to have free will and to do things and not to do things. Because this is a very paradoxical thing if we stay with Christian religion, that animals for God are perfect because He formed them, they do what they're supposed to do, and they do nothing else. They do not deviate. And then you have human beings that can deviate, and the first thing is to disappoint God and be banished from paradise. But still, He likes human beings the most. So consciousness is being removed from nature. And this is one of the big plights of modernity, that we can remove ourselves from nature, but create other problems. Then again, we do not follow strict path, but rather we explore our own paths, and we also do a lot of mistakes. And another Jung quote: an animal has the faculty of moving away and seeking its own place. It is literally less attached to the laws of the earth compared to plants. And the life of man is detached to a very high degree. We have produced an artificial world for ourselves that is very far from the laws of nature, and it has an entirely different rhythm. We had it before from the quote that was said, I think it was Milos, who said, or it was Warren, sorry if I confused it, that the psychic unconscious looks to nature and consciousness looks to culture. And this is what we do. We build with our consciousness a second nature that follows our own law. We have a lot of straight lines. We have rooms that have 4 perfect walls that are flat and in a perfect 90-degree angles. And we do not have that in nature, right? We create our second nature that makes it easier, more convenient, more safer for us. But in a sense, we're removing then ourselves from what is still deep inside in us. Because deep inside in us is nature. It is animal. And we can maybe trick us into saying we're completely separated from that, but still we have to fulfill these psychological needs that are there from us. And we have to rediscover those. Next quote. People don't understand when I tell them they should become acquainted with their animals or assimilate their animals. They think the animal is always jumping over walls and raising hell all over town. Yet in nature, the animal is a well-behaved citizen. It is pious. It follows path with great regularity. It does nothing extravagant. Only man is extravagant. Jung uses very often these pictures and metaphors of animals. And he is a huge proponent of nature, otherwise he would have not thought and talked about it so much. He has some great quotes like, only city animals are dirty, and nature animals are never dirty, which is, of course, a big claim, but goes in his direction that he is very much nature-focused, which is he also criticized in Freud, that Freud only deals with the personal, only deals with the societal, but everything else falls to the wayside. And we are in our heart animals, but follow that completely. I have a next quote. For nature can only be completely unconscious. With consciousness begins the deviation from the course of nature. We are always deviating. We are always having to find the way back. Our consciousness tries to persuade us that we can go very far. Our whole civilization has been a gigantic attempt to force nature into a rational scheme. The machine age was an attempt as a substitution, as if we could escape the unconsciousness of nature. Conscious rationalism went too far and had to return. That became a monstrosity which led to chaos. So this part of the vision shows that not only the animal instinct has been suppressed and lost, but also an insight into the real character of our conscious attempts to master nature. It really produces perversities. Jung sees the biggest problems that people can develop psychologically, because he was a therapist and he built his whole life with patients that had to struggle living their life in a normal or productive manner, that they kind of get forced just by life itself to do things, that they need to progress into a certain direction. They have a certain trajectory that they should follow. He described life really as this rising and setting of the sun. That in the beginning we are very small, we are very weak, but we grow stronger over time and we are on an upward trajectory. We grow, we expand. This happens when we are small, we're very dependent on our parents, right? Then we go into school, become a little bit more independent. We have a friend group, and then we really join society in that we have a job, we participate, we achieve things, we find more and more people, we gain skills that are valuable. But he said our unconscious and our psyche kind of punishes us for the fact when we do not do it. And he disagreed with Freud with a lot of things, but he said Freudian psychology works for the first life perfectly. As Freudian psychology is about bringing people out of the basement of their parents because they do not face life. They're not on this upward trajectory. They're not participating in society. They're not trying to find a partner. They don't try to get involved. They want to stay a child. They want to stay behind. They want to have it easy. And he says, nature and the psyche does not allow for that. He said that lazy people have the worst kind of dreams because it's the unconscious or constantly pushing to consciousness certain content and ideas and says, you have tasks that you do. And Jung says, if you do not do them, you will suffer for them. Because that's neurosis and to have complexes. And this can form in hysteria, which he says is always a problem of maladaptation. There are things you're not adapted to, but you should be. And your unconscious is constantly reminding you of that. And this idea of shadow, this fearful figure that one might encounter, it is projected onto the people that have those values and qualities that we have in our unconscious that we do not deal with. So when I'm lazy, I do not think highly of people who are productive because they remind me that I'm not a productive. And this goes to the idea of it needs to be integrated. It needs to be connected to consciousness. Consciousness is adapting. If you do not adapt to it, it will create big problems. And Jung tried to rectify these problems by making people aware of that and let them talk through their problems and the things they might not do. And he sees that really saw that in a lot of cases where people, their whole psyche was pushing forward, their whole life, their nature was pushing forward, but they were hitting the brakes. They did not want to do it because change is scary. And having a consciousness which is not good enough is incredibly hurtful because you have this set of tools and those are all the tools that you have and you try them all and they don't work and they can't work to a certain degree because you're a limited being in an unlimited universe. So you will hit a point where you tried everything you know, everything you have, and it's still not enough. And he says this is a point where the conscious dies, basically. It breaks apart. But out of that, something new will come. We had this earlier, this image before of the phoenix. Is this then really this rising, this death and rebirth idea? They said psychologically that's happening constantly. We're dying and are being reborn. And the more central this death that we're dying, because it's something fundamental in us, the more painful it will be, but also what's happening afterwards is a good thing. So this is the optimistic thing about Jungian psychology. It says there's light at the end of the tunnel. It does not matter how bad it looks now. There's potentially something behind it, which is becoming the person that you're supposed to be, that life wants you to be. So this is nice. But yeah, if you try to control nature, you will have a bad time because it's unconscious, it is autonomous, and it is incredibly strong, like a small human being, a limited being in an unlimited universe. The next quote goes into that. You see, when a man controls his anima, or a woman her animus, they are doing a thing which nobody would dream of doing, because since the world began, mankind has been possessed. And when you dare to dispossess yourself, you get into a different order of things, which means a challenge to the old order. No sooner do you get rid of one devil that all the devils are against you. If a man makes a modest attempt at controlling his anima, he will at once be faced with a situation where he is tested to the limit. All the devils in the world will try to get into his anima in order to bring him back into the fold of Mother Nature. For he gets out of the ordinary level of the flock if he even makes such attempt. And it is the same with a woman. Every available devil circulating with 100 miles will do this best to get her animus. And this is an idea. Consciousness, we are separated from nature. We can do things, can see things, but we are limited, and so we forget to take care of a lot of other things. In Jung says this is really the problem. Why a lot of people are suffering because they're not attending to the things that should be attended to. It is as if you would have an animal at home, pet, for example, a dog, and you would not take care of the dog. Pretty quickly, you and the dog will have a bad time. It will be underfed, it will be aggressive because it wants attention, it wants out, it has just needs and it's not being met. And as the dog owner, you should take care because you're also not profiting from ignoring the dog. Jung says the same thing is happening in our psyche. We're not one thing, we are many, many different things. And we have our consciousness who's kind of trying to hold it together, but we cannot ignore the things even if they're inconvenient. And this can make seem nature be very honest, but also pretty demanding. He has some quotes about that. Nature cannot stand ideas. She is hostile to consciousness because it disturbs the great unconscious in which things glide along smoothly. It goes back to the idea what is in nature has a course, it's running automatically, everything is on time, right? And then you have human beings who mess things up by just doing things and having plans. You can hardly hold a man responsible for his unconsciousness. But the fact remains in the matter, nature knows neither pity or patience. It takes her revenge directly and indirectly through illness and unlucky accidents of all kinds. And this is an idea that a lot of people don't know about Jung. Like, Jung talks a lot about the unconscious. And he paints this as a very attractive, let's say, wonderland. You can go there, you have adventures, you see ancient paths, you learn things about you. That's where creativity comes from. This is where culture is formed, where the world is going towards. But at the same time, he says it's also overwhelming. And so he treats the unconscious very often like the weather. And he says in certain situations, you just need to know how to survive the weather. You have to learn and be prepared to survive an earthquake or a thunderstorm. And this is all part of nature. Nature is good. Without nature, we would not be there. But at the same time, nature does not really care about us. Like human beings care about human beings, but nature does not care about human beings. So we have to accommodate, we have to adapt. And it is this honesty which is undeniable. And this is what Jung really uses as an objective fact that we reference ourselves against. It cannot be argued with. It is there and we have to accommodate. And he says, what we've done in modernity with science and technology and all these things are trying to bend and twist nature, but it will always fight back because it cannot be overcome. We can adapt, we can find a way how to cope together, but as soon as we try really to disturb it deeply, it will push back to get then back into balance. We make a fuss about our lives, but nature makes no fuss whatever. If nature likes to wipe out several million people, she quietly does so. In a war, we wipe out the best of men by the million. Well, that is quite natural. That is war. We can do it because we are used by an archetype. People are all possessed and wiped out by each other. And that is what nature does. So this is also really an idea by Jung. And it's interesting that Jung had a lot of ideas that later got proven. For example, that idea of war. There was a time where people thought that only human beings wage war. But we see that in a lot of species now. So we know about ants, but we also know about chimpanzees, which are pretty close to human beings, evolutionary based. And he sees when you have the movement of masses, not necessarily the individual, but really you have huge swaths of people doing the same thing. He says there's something acting in our collective layer of the psyche. It's collective because it's about a huge collective of people. And such collective things as war, but also progress. He says there's something deep inside of us that's motivating people into that direction. And for those who are interested, there's an incredibly hard book to understand, which is called Ion, that deals with that the changes of the collective unconscious that happened over the last 2.5 thousand years. So what do? We are separated from nature. Nature is undeniable and it can be incredibly cruel. And in the end, the question is, how do we accommodate? How do we deal with it? Nature isn't simple. Nature has always been the greatest problem to man, and we never shall arrive at a complete truth about it. Still, we have to cope with this. Another quote: "You trust your unconscious like a loving father, but it is nature, and you cannot rely on it like a reliable human being. The unconscious is inhuman and needs the human mind to serve human purposes. Nature is an incomparable guide if you know how to follow it. It is like a compass needle that points north, which is extremely useful if you have a well-built ship and know how to steer it." He had some patients where, as soon as he introduced, of course, this, let's say, wonderland of unconscious, that they will say, "Oh yeah, I need to make this decision, but I wait till my unconscious tells me what to do. So until I have the right dream, I won't make a decision and I won't progress further." And he said, that's a wrong idea. The unconscious is not really smarter than you. It is more the consciousness and unconscious together. This is smart. So you cannot remove yourself and say, like, okay, just what I dream, I will do, and what comes up as a thought, I will follow. It is really this concept of both things working together that creates this magic. You have the piece of lead, and through human action, it transforms into gold. And you have the diamond, and through human understanding, you understand that it is valuable. Another quote: "In the long run, this doesn't work. It is not good to be up against nature. Then we will simply lose our grip. We have to choose. We have to consider the way of the unconscious and adapt to our will." It is, as I said, a complex relationship that we have with nature. We are from nature, but we're also removed from nature. And we have to be human beings, do our human things removed from nature, but we have to come back. And I took this as a quote for this event, that touching nature does something with us. It does something psychologically wise. You maybe know about this concept from ancient Greek theater of catharsis, that people go into the theater to feel emotional release. What a theater, what the theater play. It's culture, it's art, it's coming from the collective unconscious. When we experience those archetypes and those images that we do not consciously understand, but our unconscious knows exactly what to do with it, we connect to it internally. This is why we love songs and stories, and also want to have these archetypal situations of, for example, finding a partner, having children, being useful in society, having a family and being there. Those are things that human beings have done for millions of years, and they need to be there to satisfy this need. We have this psychological need to follow also these archetypes and let them happen in our life. It's similar as the need for salt. It is just there, and we have to deal with it. We need to consume salt, and our body will complain very dearly if we do not get salt. And Jung uses this exact metaphor also psychologically wise. We have to have certain things happening in our psyche. And this getting back to nature, to touching nature, is important. So it's so funny that there's, since last year, I think, a meme in the internet where they tell people to touch grass. So to remove themselves from the internet, which is extremely human and extremely conscious and extremely abstract and removed from nature. You say, go out and touch grass, ground yourself, and be connected with nature again, and think about it objectively. It is this what I was a little bit afraid of when I talked about nature, or to choose this as a topic, that I thought the immediate expectation from everyone coming was, okay, I will talk about the environmental nature. So like trees and the forest. And Jung talked about that also, but yeah, what he sees there, that people can get lost in nature. Because he says human beings started out in nature. We were completely one, also psychologically wise, with nature. We had the gods in the sky, we had the nixes in the river and in the forest, and we had demons in stones and all these things. So nature was for us alive, not materialistically, not animal like, but also psychologically wise. We were deeply ingrained with that. You see that in a lot of early human culture and religion and stories. that we see a lot of things happening in nature and we connect all the gods and all the creatures somehow with nature. It has to do with water, it has to do with lightning. And it is only later through Christianity that it gets removed and gets more abstract and abstracted out to more like this spirit idea that is removed from nature in a way. And I have a quote about that when what happens when human beings are in nature. It is quite true that contact with nature makes one more or less unconscious. In that respect, the influence of nature is hostile. When fairly primitive people are exposed to the intense influence of nature, they simply become unconscious. One sees that happening still. People nowadays go to the woods and the mountains just in order to become unconscious. To identify with nature is a great relief from the stain of consciousness and the life of the city. So while we have consciousness, it's incredibly taxing. So we cannot have consciousness 24/7. We concentrate a lot for a short amount of time, and already we're tired. We need to rest. We need to unwind. We need to do something different. And every night we need to sleep. There's no way around it. And we know this especially when we learn something new, that we can hold our attention for a couple of minutes or maybe half an hour, and then our mind starts to drift. We cannot take in anymore. So consciousness is incredibly effort intensive, energy intensive thing. So I think something like 20% of the energy that the human body produces, or I think even more, goes just into the brain, just to function as we are, which is unusual in the context with other animals. And Jung saw that for human beings to go into nature, it's in one sense, it's relaxing, but on the other side, it's another way of becoming unconscious, to become then engulfed again in this atmosphere of nature and getting kind of lost there. And this I found a really interesting idea because I have some friends who are really engrossed with nature and they always want to be on nature. And I would say their life is not progressing as other people's lives. And I envy always that they're in nature. But the thing is, okay, at what point might it get an addiction? At what point is doing something a way of running away and not confronting something? And this is what Jung says really is the most important thing that we can do is confronting, being aware and really contending with something. This is the only way to integrate with it. So he also told the story of how in early Christendom, the church did not like to send out the monks and the Christian people into certain regions that were very beautiful nature-wise because people come overwhelmed. Like it's no accident that human beings came up that, oh, this mountain is a god and this thunderstorm is a god, but it's because it's engrossing, it's captivating. And he said that they lost quite many missionaries to nature, that they went to the Matterhorn and said, oh, this is so beautiful, I will stay here and I will stop being Christian. So it always needs to be looked out for that consciousness is an important part. It needs to be followed. And to go even in a more abstract way, I mentioned Ion. He saw the last Ion. For those familiar with astrology, it was the one of Pisces, the two fishes. One is vertical, one is horizontal. And he's in the book Ion, he matches the development in human psyche and of human endeavor to this movement of the fishes. So he said the first 1,000 years was vertical, it was spiritual, removing ourselves from nature. You have this fish movement is discounting materialism, focus on spiritual, like it's a purely spiritual thing. The earthly possessions are not important. Urges should not be followed, and all these things. This is very vertical. And he said, oh, there's happened something in the last 1,000 years, which was people become horizontal, and horizontal is more in the world. This is exploring, spreading out. This is when human beings really built the ships also to go on different continents in a massive scale, and also to explore the world through science and try to categorize it and try to understand it, to become more engrossed with nature and to understand it better, which is really abstract if you hear it for the first time. And it also took me a long time to understand it. But yeah, I think what becomes pretty clear through all the examples and all the quotes is for Jung, nature is really an existential, essential thing about what it means to be a human being. We are not removed from that. We always have to keep it into account. And the things that are happening to us are very often nature and natural. And he says natural things can never be traumatic. Otherwise, the whole continent of Africa would have a hell of a neurosis. It's another quote. He talks about Africa, of course, 100 years ago. So he thinks all these things are manageable and they're solvable, and we have codified in culture and in mythology and religion and spirituality and fairy tales the way how to deal with it, how to encounter nature in a productive and good way. But at the same time, he says, in the modern age, human beings, people want to understand, and they're very critical, which is consciousness doing a thing. It's separating, categorizing, naming, bringing into some kind of relationship to each other. That this also destroys a lot of things, like all our past old knowledge that is codified there is not really understandable or believable for us anymore. So it has to be rediscovered. And he says this is psychology. So it's not an accident that he's a psychologist and talks about these things, and then of course talks positively about psychology. But he says the need to understand is expressed through psychology. We want to understand what is happening within us. And he said what is happening within us are a lot of natural processes that we now experiencing naturally for the first time. We had in the other quote that in the past, human beings were basically possessed. They just followed, like animals, certain instincts and archetypes and acted them out. But now we stop and reflect and think about what we're doing. And this stops us, of course, and makes it possible for us to really question this. But at the same time, we stop following this progress. And then our psyche, nature pushes us to go forward. So it's a difficult deal. And it's the same deal that, of course, then Lucifer or Prometheus had. Like, it is progress, it's moving forward, but at the same time, you're getting punished for it. So it's a kind of balance that needs to be re-explored. And Jung saw his work really in that, doing that on a psychological basis to re-explore these old ideas and set it into a modern, understandable context. And this is also why I want to do these events, to talk about the really cool things that Jung talked about and his ideas that he had. And that would conclude my presentation part for this topic on nature. And I want to thank you all for your attention, very late in the evening or very early in the morning, and following. And yeah, so. This was this event's topic. Thanks for tuning in. During an event, a discussion part follows after the presentation where all attendees discuss the just presented topic or other Jungian concepts. If you also want to join, find the group on meetup.com. The name of the group is CG Jung-helpdesk. Also make sure to subscribe to the podcast on the platform of your choice. See you next time.